As Christians around the world prepare to celebrate Easter tomorrow, Israel's ambassador to the UN is calling attention to the persecution of Christians in the Middle East. He compares it to the plight Jewish people have suffered through the ages.
In an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, he writes, over the past century, another exodus driven by a plague of persecution has swept across the Middle East and is emptying the region of its Christian population. The persecution is especially virulent today. So how should the U.S. deal with this attack on faith? Joining us now to discuss is Middle East expert and Fox News contributor Lisa Daftari. And Lisa, thanks for joining us today. When you see some of these facts, it's almost like it just doesn't get the attention that it should be getting. Just a couple of things, we can talk about it. As of the turn of the century, the 20th century, Christians made up 26% of the Middle East population. Now it's less than 10%. Conversely, Israel is the only country where the Christian population is rising. What is happening with Christians?
Right. What the ambassador is calling attention to is that we shouldn't just look at these incidents that are the targeting of Christians as isolated incidents against individuals, but what's really happening is that these entire populations of Christians in different countries throughout the Middle East are being affected, and they were a pivotal part of these societies in Iraq, in Syria, and what's basically the ambassador is saying is that it's human rights that in Israel they're allowed to worship in freedom, and in these other countries they're not, and we shouldn't take politics and separate it from the human rights issues. When we're dealing with a country like Iran, when we're dealing with a country like Syria, we shouldn't separate the politics from the human rights.
It's not just, I agree completely, but it's not just Iran and Syria. It's all over the region, and even South Asia. It's Pakistan, for example. It's Lebanon. It's Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. All those places, I've been to them,
Korea
have lost their Christian populations, and nobody seems to care in the U.S. Why is it all these church groups are focused on the Middle East? Nobody seems to care about the persecution of Christians.
It's not that, people care and people call attention to it, but it's not in the moments that we need them to call attention to it. And you're absolutely right. It's happening in Egypt and North Africa and Pakistan, all over the region. But what ends up happening is in that moment when we want to negotiate, for example, with Iran, we're focused on that negotiation. We're not calling for the 3 Americans who are being held there to be released. We're not calling for Pastor Abedini, the Christian that's being held there, to be released. And these dictators are taking advantage of, cracking down on Christianity, and you have to ask, what's the sensitivity towards Christianity? It's a threat to Islam. And a lot of these born Muslims are turning to Christianity because they want to worship God, they want to turn to a religion, and they're finding haven in Christianity. And why do they see it as a threat? They see it as an import from the West. They think that with this conversion to Christianity, it's going to bring in inspiration and ideas from the West, and that's a threat to the political institution. So what the White House has to understand is just as these nations are not separating and they're using these crackdowns on Christians and other human rights violations to stay in power, we too have to address them when we have leverage in the political arena.
Well, we're hearing about that. This is like the second time we've heard about this from the UN ambassador from Israel. This it happened two years ago. I think there was an op-ed basically calling attention to the same issue. Thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.